Welcome. I'm so glad to be back with you. Every story you're about to hear is real, terrifying, and sent in by listeners just like you. So, turn off the lights, wrap yourself in a blanket, grab some snacks. You're in for a night of true horror. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It truly helps and inspires us to bring you even more chilling tales. Are you ready? Then settle in, because it's time for the long-awaited scary stories for a rainy evening. The salty tang of the ocean air was a familiar embrace to Captain Elias Hartmann, a seasoned sailor whose life had been irrevocably tied to the sea. Born in Hamburg, Germany, Elias had spent his youth on the bustling docks of the Elbe River, where tales of distant lands and mysterious waters were whispered among the sailors. Now, at 47, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the deep, he commanded the Siren's Shadow, a sturdy three-masted schooner renowned for its speed and resilience. It was a moonless night when Elias first heard the call, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried by the wind, like the sigh of a forgotten spirit. The crew, a motley group of men and women from across Europe, had gathered on deck after a long day of navigating treacherous waters near the Azores. Among them was Sofia Alvarez, the ship's navigator, whose sharp intellect and unshakable courage had earned her respect despite the skepticism of some older sailors. Then there was Victor Novak, the burly Czech first mate whose bellowing laugh could be heard over even the fiercest storms, and Annelise Dubois, a French botanist who had joined the voyage to catalog rare marine flora. As Elias stood at the helm, gazing out into the endless expanse of black water, the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't a sound one could easily dismiss. It was as if the ocean itself was speaking directly to him, beckoning him towards something unknown. He turned to his crew, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "Did any of you hear that?" he asked, his words cutting through the soft murmur of conversation. Sophia tilted her head, her dark curls catching the dim light of the lanterns. "Hear what, Captain?" "That whisper," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon, like a voice carried on the waves. Victor chuckled, brushing off the question with the palm of his hand. "Probably just the wind playing tricks, Captain. Or maybe it's the rum talking." But Annalise, ever the observer, frowned. She stepped closer, her green eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkness. "I felt something too," she admitted softly. "A strange pull, like the sea wants us to go somewhere." Elias nodded, his expression grim. He had always trusted his instincts, honed by decades at sea, and they were screaming at him now. Whatever this force was, it was no trick of nature. It was deliberate, purposeful, and it wanted him to follow. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden rays across the restless waves, Elias called a meeting in the captain's quarters. The room was cramped but functional, filled with charts, instruments, and the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. Around the small wooden table sat Sophia, Victor, and Annalise, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I've decided we're going to investigate the source of that whisper," Elias announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Whatever it is, it's not natural, and I won't ignore it." Sophia leaned forward, her hands resting on the map spread before them. "Captain, do you have any idea where it might be leading us? We're already far from our intended course." Elias hesitated, then reached into a locked drawer and pulled out an ancient yellowed map. Its edges were frayed and strange symbols adorned its surface, etched in ink that seemed to shimmer faintly under the light. "This," he said, placing it on the table, "was given to me years ago by an old sailor in Lisbon. He claimed it led to a place untouched by time or man, a place where the boundary between our world and something else is thin." Victor squinted at the map, his brow furrowing. "Looks like nonsense to me. What are these markings supposed to mean?" "They're coordinates," Sophia murmured, tracing the lines with her finger. but they don't match anything on modern maps. This must be incredibly old. Annalise leaned in, her interest piqued. Do you think this is connected to the Whisper? I do, Elias replied, and I believe it's guiding us there. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Victor grumbled about superstition and wasted time, while Annalise expressed cautious excitement, eager to uncover the mysteries hinted at by the map. Sophia, ever pragmatic, began plotting a new course, her mind racing with calculations and possibilities. As the ship changed direction, heading toward the uncharted waters indicated on the map, an uneasy tension settled over the crew. The ocean seemed different now, darker, heavier, as if it bore the weight of countless secrets. Even the seabirds that usually accompanied the vessel vanished, leaving only silence in their wake. That night, as Elias stood alone on the quarterdeck, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The stars above twinkled faintly, but the water below remained impenetrable, a void that refused to yield its secrets. Yet beneath the surface, something stirred, a presence that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. And then, just as the first hints of dawn began to break, the Whisper returned. The days passed slowly, each one bringing the siren shadow closer to the coordinates marked on the ancient map. The crew worked tirelessly, their movements mechanical, driven by a combination of duty and growing dread. Conversations became sparse, and laughter, a once common sound aboard the ship, had all but disappeared. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as though the very air they breathed carried the weight of the unknown. On the fifth day, the sea transformed. The waves, previously calm and predictable, grew erratic, churning with an unnatural ferocity. The sky, too, shifted, clouds gathering in ominous formations that blocked out the sun. It was as if the elements themselves conspired against them, urging them to turn back. But Elias remained resolute, his grip on the wheel tightening with every passing hour. It's getting worse, Sophia muttered, clutching the railing as the ship rocked violently. Her usually composed demeanor was beginning to crack, her knuckles white from the strain. We should consider turning around, Captain. This isn't normal. We're close, Elias replied, his voice low but firm. I can feel it. Victor, who had been silent for much of the journey, finally spoke up. Close to what? Death? Madness? You're leading us to ruin, Hartman. Before Elias could respond, Annalise interrupted, her voice trembling but determined. Look, she pointed toward the bow, where the water ahead seemed to shimmer unnaturally, as though reflecting something invisible to the naked eye. As the ship drew nearer, the shimmer resolved into a massive whirlpool, its edges glowing faintly with an eerie, phosphorescent light. What in God's name is that? Victor gasped, taking a step back. It's beautiful, Annalise whispered, her eyes wide with awe, and terrifying. Elias steered the ship cautiously toward the vortex, his heart pounding in his chest. The whisper was louder now, a cacophony of voices overlapping and intertwining, speaking in languages he didn't understand. The crew held their breath as the siren shadow approached the edge of the whirlpool, its pull threatening to drag them into the abyss. Hold on, Elias shouted, gripping the wheel with both hands. We're going in! With a deafening roar, the ship was sucked into the vortex, plunging into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but chaos, the sound of splintering wood, the screams of the crew, and the relentless rush of water. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything went still. When Elias opened his eyes, he found himself standing on the deck of the ship, surrounded by an impossible sight. They were no longer on the open sea, but in a vast underwater cavern, illuminated by bioluminescent plants that glowed in shades of blue and green. Towering coral structures stretched toward the ceiling, and strange, shadowy creatures darted through the water beyond the ship's hull. Where are we? Sophia stammered, her voice barely audible. Elias didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the center of the cavern, where a massive ancient structure loomed, An underwater temple carved from obsidian, its surface covered in the same symbols that adorn the map. At its base, a figure stood waiting, cloaked in darkness, its form shifting and indistinct. And then it spoke, its voice resonating in their minds rather than their ears. "Welcome, seekers. You have come far, but beware, for knowledge comes at a price." The voice echoed through the cavern, reverberating not just in their ears but deep within their chests, as if it were trying to burrow into their very souls. Elias felt a cold sweat break out across his skin, though the water around them was warm and still. The figure at the base of the temple remained shrouded in shadow, its form indistinct, almost liquid-like, shifting and writhing as if alive. Yet there was no mistaking the intelligence behind those glowing eyes. Eyes that seemed to pierce through every layer of pretense and fear. "Who are you?" Elias called out, his voice steady despite the dread pooling in his stomach. He stepped forward, placing himself between the crew and the mysterious entity. "What do you want from us?" The figure tilted its head, an action that seemed both curious and predatory. "I am what remains," it said, its tone neither malevolent nor kind, but indifferent, as if humanity's existence was nothing more than a fleeting curiosity, a guardian of truths long forgotten by your kind. And you have trespassed where none should tread. Sophia gripped the railing tightly, her knuckles white. "We didn't mean to intrude," she said, her voice trembling. "We followed the map. It led us here." "A map," the figure repeated, its voice dripping with disdain. "A crude imitation of knowledge meant for greater minds than yours. Tell me, mortals, why do you seek what lies beyond the veil? Is it power you crave? Or perhaps answers to questions you cannot bear to face?" Annalise stepped forward hesitantly, her green eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. "We're explorers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We came here to understand, to learn. If there's something hidden beneath the waves, shouldn't it be known?" The figure let out a sound that might have been laughter or a growl. It raised one elongated skeletal arm, pointing toward the obsidian temple. "Very well," it said. "If knowledge is what you desire, then enter. But know this, once you cross the threshold, there will be no turning back. Some truths are too heavy for fragile minds to bear." Elias exchanged glances with his crew. Sophia looked pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Victor clenched his fists, his jaw tight with anger and fear. Annalise, however, seemed transfixed, her gaze locked on the temple as if drawn by some unseen force. "We don't have a choice," Elias finally said, his voice firm. "We've come too far to turn back now." With that, he led the way, descending from the ship onto the cavern floor. The ground beneath their feet was slick with algae and moss, glowing faintly in the dim light. As they approached the temple, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, soft, insistent murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of the ocean above was pressing down on them. At the entrance to the temple stood a massive archway adorned with intricate carvings. Upon closer inspection, the symbols matched those on the ancient map, but they were alive, pulsating faintly with a sickly green light. The crew hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. "This feels wrong," Victor muttered, his voice low, "like we're walking into a trap." "It already feels like a trap," Sophia snapped, her usual composure fraying. "But what else can we do? Swim back up? We'd never make it." Elias placed a hand on the cool stone of the archway. "Stay close," he said, "and keep your wits about you. Whatever happens, don't lose sight of each other." As they crossed the threshold, the world shifted. Inside the temple, reality itself seemed to warp and twist. The walls shimmered with an iridescent glow, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and decay. Strange guttural sounds echoed through the halls, blending with the whispers that now surrounded them like a chorus of ghosts. Shadows danced along the walls, taking on shapes that hinted at monstrous forms before dissolving into nothingness. The crew moved cautiously, their lanterns casting feeble beams of light that barely penetrated the oppressive darkness. Every few steps, they encountered new horrors carved into the stone. Scenes of sailors drowning, ships being torn apart by colossal tentacles, and figures screaming in agony as they were consumed by the sea. Each image was more grotesque than the last, and Annalise found herself averting her eyes, unable to look directly at the macabre depictions. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's like a record of death." "Or a warning," Sophia replied, her own voice hollow. "Maybe we're supposed to leave while we still can." Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled violently, sending them stumbling. From the shadows emerged a new presence, a towering creature made entirely of swirling black smoke, its form constantly shifting and reforming. Its eyes burned with a crimson light, and when it opened its mouth, deafening roar filled the chamber. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" it bellowed, its voice shaking the very foundations of the temple. Elias raised his hands in a gesture of peace, though his heart raced wildly. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "We only wish to understand." The creature loomed over them, its fiery gaze boring into each member of the crew. "Understanding comes at a gaze," it hissed. "Are you prepared to pay?" Victor stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Enough riddles," he shouted. "What do you want from us?" The creature tilted its head, studying him with an expression that might have been amusement. "Your memories," it said simply. "Each of you must surrender something precious, something that defines who you are. Only then will I grant you passage." Silence fell over the group as the weight of the creature's words sank in. Memories were the essence of identity. Without them, what would remain? "I'll go first," Annalise said suddenly, surprising everyone. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Take whatever you need. I trust that the truth is worth it." The creature extended a smoky tendril toward her, brushing against her forehead. For a moment she froze, her body rigid, before collapsing to the ground. When she opened her eyes again, they were empty, devoid of recognition. "No!" Sophia cried, rushing to her side. "Annalise, can you hear me?" But Annalise merely blinked, her gaze unfocused. She had lost something vital, something that made her who she was. One by one, the others faced the creature, each sacrificing a piece of themselves. Victor gave up his strength, reduced to a trembling shell of a man. Sophia surrendered her courage, leaving her paralyzed with fear. And finally, it was Elias's turn. "What will you give?" the creature asked, its voice softer now, almost gentle. Elias hesitated, his mind racing. What could he offer that wouldn't destroy him completely? Then he realized the answer. His guilt. The guilt he carried for past mistakes, for lives lost under his command. It was a burden he had borne for years, and now, in this surreal underworld, he was willing to let it go. "Take it," he said, closing his eyes. "Take everything." When the creature touched him, a flood of emotions surged through his body. Relief, grief, regret, all crashing together in a torrent of sensation. When it was over, he felt lighter, freer, but also strangely hollow. "You may proceed," the creature intoned, stepping aside to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. As the crew descended, they couldn't help but wonder what truths awaited them below, and at what cost would they uncover them. The staircase seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth, each step echoing with a hollow resonance that reverberated through the cavern. The air grew colder and denser, pressing against their lungs like an invisible weight. Shadows writhed along the walls, taking on grotesque forms, faces twisted in agony, hands reaching out as if begging for salvation. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of voices that spoke in tongues none of them could comprehend. Elias led the way, his lantern casting flickering beams of light that barely illuminated the path ahead. Behind him, the crew followed in silence, their faces pale and drawn. Annalise still moved mechanically, her eyes vacant, while Sophia clung to Victor's arm, her usual composure shattered. Victor himself had become a shadow of his former self, his broad shoulders slumped, his once booming voice reduced to a faint murmur. At the bottom of the staircase, they emerged into a vast chamber unlike anything they had seen before. The room was circular, its ceiling lost in darkness, and its floor covered in a mosaic of shifting colors that pulsed faintly, as if alive. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal carved from black stone, upon which rested a glowing orb. Its light was hypnotic, drawing their gazes despite the unease it provoked. "This is it," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of whispers. "This must be what we've been waiting for." As they approached the pedestal, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, a voice that seemed to emanate from the orb itself. It was neither male nor female, neither human nor animal, but something altogether alien. "You seek knowledge," the voice intoned, its words resonating in their minds rather than their ears. "But beware, mortals, for knowledge is not always merciful. What you learn here will change you forever." "What are you?" Elias asked, his voice steadied despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "Are you the one who brought us here?" "I am the keeper of truths," the voice replied, "a fragment of the abyss that exists beyond your understanding. You have paid the price demanded by my servant, and now I shall grant you what you desire. But know this, some truths are meant to remain buried." Before anyone could respond, the orb flared brightly, bathing the chamber in blinding light. Images began to flash before their eyes, visions of the past, present, and future, all intertwined in a kaleidoscope of fragmented memories. They saw civilizations rising and falling, oceans swallowing entire continents, and creatures of unimaginable horror lurking in the depths. Each vision was accompanied by a surge of emotion so intense it threatened to overwhelm them. Elias saw himself standing on the deck of a ship during a violent storm, watching as a younger sailor was swept overboard. He remembered the guilt, the sleepless nights spent replaying the moment in his mind, wondering if he could have done more. But now, the memory was gone, replaced by a sense of detachment. He felt lighter, yes, but also incomplete, as if a vital piece of his soul had been excised. Sophia saw herself navigating treacherous waters, her calculations precise, her decisions flawless. Yet she also saw the faces of those who had doubted her, their sneers and jeers cutting deeper than any blade. Without her courage, she felt exposed, vulnerable, her confidence stripped away like layers of skin. Victor saw himself towering over his enemies, his strength unmatched, his presence commanding. But now he was reduced to a trembling husk, unable to lift even his own weight. His pride, once unshakable, had crumbled into dust. Annalise, though devoid of consciousness, seemed to react to the visions as well. Her body twitched involuntarily, her vacant eyes reflecting the swirling lights of the orb. Whatever memories she had surrendered were clearly essential to her identity, leaving her little more than a shell. When the visions finally subsided, the crew found themselves kneeling on the floor, gasping for breath. The orb dimmed, its glow fading into a soft, pulsating rhythm. The whispers ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on them like a physical force. "Is that it?" Victor croaked, his voice barely audible. "Is that all there is?" "No," Elias replied, his tone grim. "It's only the beginning." As they rose to their feet, the chamber began to shift around them. The mosaic beneath their feet rippled like liquid, and the walls dissolved into a swirling void of darkness. The pedestal and the orb remained, but everything else, the boundaries of the room, the staircase they had descended, was gone. They were adrift in an endless expanse suspended between worlds. "What's happening?" Sophia cried, clutching her head as if trying to hold on to the fragments of her sanity. "Where are we?" "We're nowhere," Elias said, his voice hollow. "Or everywhere. This place exists outside the rules of our reality." The orb pulsed again, and another vision appeared. Not as a series of images this time, but as a single overwhelming truth. It was a truth so vast, so incomprehensible, that their minds struggled to process it. They saw the true nature of the universe, not as a collection of stars and planets, but as a living, breathing entity. The ocean was its bloodstream, the currents its veins, and the creatures within it mere cells in a cosmic organism. Humanity, with all its achievements and failures, was nothing more than a fleeting anomaly, a speck of dust clinging to the surface of a greater existence. The realization hit them like a tidal wave, shattering whatever remained of their fragile psyches. Sophia screamed, clutching her ears as if trying to block out the deafening roar of infinity. Victor collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he muttered incoherently. Even Elias, whose resolve had carried them this far, staggered under the weight of the revelation. "We're insignificant," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Everything we've ever known, it's meaningless." The orb pulsed one final time, and then it shattered, its shards dissolving into the void. As it did, the chamber and the temple itself began to collapse. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered, sending jagged fissures racing outward. The whispers returned, louder and more frenzied than ever, urging them to flee. "Run!" Elias shouted, grabbing Sophia's arm and pulling her toward the collapsing staircase. "We have to get out of here." But the exit was no longer visible. Instead, the swirling void enveloped them, dragging them deeper into the abyss. One by one, they vanished into the darkness, their screams fading into silence. When Elias opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the deck of the Siren's shadow. The sun was rising, casting golden rays across the restless waves. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream, a feverish hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the isolation of the sea. But then he looked around and saw the others. Sophia sat huddled near the railing, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror. Victor leaned against the mast, his body frail and emaciated, his once mighty frame reduced to a shadow of its former self. And Annalise. Annalise was gone. There was no trace of her anywhere. "What happened?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse. "Where's Annalise?" Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she whispered. She disappeared, just like that." Elias clenched his fists, his mind racing. He remembered the temple, the orb, the visions, but the details were hazy, slipping through his fingers like sand. The truth they had uncovered lingered at the edges of his consciousness, too vast to fully grasp, but impossible to forget. "We need to leave," Chitti said it finally. "Now." The crew didn't argue. They worked in silence, raising the sails and steering the ship back toward open waters. But as they sailed away, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Beneath the waves, something stirred, a presence that had been awakened by their intrusion. And deep within the ocean's heart, the whispers continued. The siren's shadow cut through the waves with an urgency that bordered on desperation. The crew worked in silence, their movements mechanical, their eyes hollow. Each of them carried the weight of what they had seen, or rather, what they could no longer fully remember. The truth was there, lurking just beyond the veil of their fractured minds, a shadowy specter that whispered incessantly in the back of their thoughts. Elias stood at the helm, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. His once steady gaze darted across the horizon, searching for something, anything, that might explain the gnawing sense of dread in his chest. But all he saw was the endless expanse of water, shimmering under the sun like a mirage. It was beautiful, serene even, yet every ripple seemed to carry a hidden menace. "Captain," Sophia called out hesitantly from behind him. Her voice was barely audible over the wind, but it carried a note of unease that made Elias turn sharply. She held a weathered journal in her trembling hands, the same one she had been using to record their journey. I think you should see this." Elias stepped down from the helm and approached her, his boots thudding softly against the wooden deck. He took the journal from her and flipped it open. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles, diagrams, and sketches that made little sense. Swirling patterns resembling underwater currents, cryptic symbols that matched those on the ancient map, and fragmented sentences written in a shaky hand. "We are not alone. It knows we exist. Do not look into the depths." Elias frowned, flipping through the pages rapidly. None of this looked familiar, yet somehow he knew it was his own handwriting, or rather, it had been his handwriting before his memories had been stripped away. The realization sent a chill coursing through him. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. "When did I write this?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted, her voice cracking. "I found it this morning when I went to check your cabin. It wasn't there before. At least, I don't think it was. Everything feels so blurry." Elias closed the journal and stared out at the sea, his jaw clenched. Whatever had happened in the temple had left more than just gaps in their memories. It had planted seeds of paranoia, doubt, and fear, seeds that were already beginning to take root. By nightfall, the atmosphere aboard the ship had grown unbearable. The stars above twinkled faintly, but the ocean below remained impenetrable, a void that refused to yield its secrets. The crew huddled together near the mainmast, speaking in hushed tones about the strange occurrences that had begun since their escape from the abyssal temple. First, there were the sounds, faint, almost imperceptible clicks and groans emanating from beneath the ship. At first, they dismissed it as the creaking of the hull or the movement of fish, but the noises grew louder, more deliberate, as if something massive was following them through the depths. Then came the shadows. Every time someone glanced over the railing, they swore they saw shapes moving just below the surface, long, sinuous forms that defied logic and reason. Victor claimed he saw tentacles coiling around the keel, while Sophia insisted she spotted glowing eyes peering up at her from the darkness. Even Elias couldn't deny the feeling of being watched, as though the ocean itself had turned hostile. "It's coming for us," Annalise suddenly blurted out, startling everyone. They had assumed she was still missing, lost to the void within the temple, but here she was standing among them, her face pale and expressionless. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as if she were merely repeating words spoken by another. "Annalise!" Sophie exclaimed, rushing toward her. "Where have you been? We thought you were gone?" Annalise interrupted, tilting her head slightly. Her green eyes, once vibrant and curious, now seemed empty, like windows into a hollow shell. "I was, and now I'm back, but it's still with me." "What's still with you?" Elias demanded, stepping forward. He reached out to touch her shoulder, but she flinched away, her body stiffening. "The knowledge," she whispered, her voice dropping to a barely audible murmur. "It's inside me. It wants to be free." Before anyone could respond, the ship rocked violently, throwing them off balance. A deafening roar erupted from beneath the waves, shaking the very foundations of the vessel. The crew scrambled to hold on to anything stable as the water around them churned furiously, forming a massive whirlpool that threatened to drag the Siren's shadow under. "What's happening?" Victor shouted, his voice trembling with panic. "What is that thing?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he raced to the helm, fighting to keep the ship steady as the whirlpool tightened its grip. Overhead, the sky darkened unnaturally, clouds gathering in a spiral formation that mirrored the chaos below. Lightning crackled in the distance, illuminating the silhouette of something enormous rising from the depths. And then it emerged. The creature broke the surface with a thunderous crash, sending waves crashing over the sides of the ship. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. A monstrous amalgamation of tentacles, scales, and jagged teeth. Its body stretched endlessly, coiling around the siren's shadow like a serpent preparing to strike. Eyes the size of dinner plates glowed with an otherworldly light, fixed unblinkingly on the terrified crew. "It's the Guardian," Annalise murmured, her vacant gaze locked on the beast. "It followed us." "Guardian?" Elias barked, his voice strained as he fought to maintain control of the wheel. "What are you talking about?" "It protects the truth," she replied, her tone eerily calm, "and it won't let us leave until it's sure we understand." As if in response to her words, the Leviathan let out another ear-splitting roar, its tentacles lashing out wildly. One of them slammed into the mast, splintering it into pieces. The sails tore loose, flapping uselessly in the wind as the ship tilted dangerously to one side. "We're going to sink!" Sophia screamed, clutching the railing for dear life. "We need to abandon ship." "No," Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If we jump, it'll drag us down. We have to fight our way out of this." "But how?" Victor yelled, his face pale with terror. "We're no match for that thing." Elias hesitated, his mind racing. Then his eyes fell on the ancient map, still clutched in his pocket. Without thinking, he pulled it out and unfolded it, holding it up toward the creature. The symbols on the map began to glow faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the Leviathan's movements. The effect was immediate. The beast paused, its massive body hovering motionless above the waves. Its glowing eyes narrowed, studying the map with an intensity that made Elias's skin crawl. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered one of its tentacles toward the paper, brushing against it gently. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a final mournful cry, the Leviathan retreated, sinking back into the depths as quickly as it had appeared. The whirlpool dissipated, leaving the siren's shadow battered but intact. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the crew gathered on the deck, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. The storm had passed, leaving behind a surreal calm that felt almost unnatural. The ship drifted aimlessly, its sails torn, its mast broken, but it was still afloat. "What just happened?" Sophia asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "I don't know," Elias admitted, folding the map carefully and tucking it back into his pocket. "But whatever that thing was, it recognized the map. Maybe it thought we belonged down there." "And do we?" Victor muttered bitterly, staring out at the endless expanse of water. "After everything we've seen, everything we've lost, do we really deserve to go back?" No one answered. The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Annalise stood apart from the group, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in her posture, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "It's not over," she said. "Whatever we unleashed, it's still out there, waiting." Elias nodded slowly, his heart sinking. He knew she was right. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had only grown quieter, biding their time. And deep within the ocean's heart, the abyss stirred once more. The days that followed were a blur of survival and paranoia. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the siren shadow, their hands blistered and raw from the effort. Yet, no matter how much progress they made, the ship seemed cursed. Ropes frayed inexplicably, tools went missing, and strange noises echoed through the hall at night. It was as if the ocean itself had turned against them, punishing them for their intrusion into its secrets. Elias spent most of his time alone on the quarterdeck, staring out at the horizon with haunted eyes. The journal he had found in his cabin weighed heavily on his mind. Its cryptic entries hinted at truths he could no longer fully recall, but the fragments that lingered were enough to keep him awake at night. He began to wonder if the knowledge they had uncovered was worth the cost. The fractured minds, the lost memories, the creeping madness that now plagued them all. Sophia too had changed. Once confident and composed, she now jumped at every sound, her gaze darting nervously toward the water. She spent hours poring over nautical charts, plotting courses that would take them far from the coordinates marked on the ancient map. But no matter how many detours they took, the whisper always returned, guiding them back toward the abyss. Annalise remained an enigma. She moved among the crew like a ghost, her presence unsettling even to those who had known her before. Her vacant eyes seemed to see things no one else could, and her occasional mutterings, "It's watching us. It knows we're here," left everyone on edge. Yet despite her eerie demeanor, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that she held the key to their salvation, or their doom. On the seventh day after their encounter with the Leviathan, the sea grew calm, too calm. The waves stilled, the wind died, and an unnatural silence settled over the ship. Even the seabirds that usually accompany them vanished, leaving only the creak of the rigging and the soft lapping of water against the hull. "It's happening again," Annalise whispered, breaking the oppressive quiet. She stood at the bow, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's coming." Before anyone could respond, the water around the ship began to shimmer faintly, as if reflecting something invisible above. Then, without warning, the ocean erupted in a torrent of light and shadow. The Leviathan emerged once more, its massive form coiling around the siren's shadow like a predator cornering its prey. This time, however, it wasn't alone. Dozens of smaller creatures, tentacled monstrosities with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth, rose from the depths surrounding the ship. Their movements were synchronized, almost ritualistic, as if they were part of some ancient ceremony. "What do they want?" Victor shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Why won't they leave us alone?" "They want what we took," Annalise replied, her tone eerily calm. "The truth, they'll never stop until they get it back." Elias clenched his fists, his mind racing. He knew there was only one way to end this, to confront the abyss head on. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the ancient map and held it aloft, just as he had done before. "Take it," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Take it and leave us be." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, deliberately, the Leviathan extended one of its massive tentacles toward the map. As soon as it touched the paper, the symbols flared brightly, releasing a blinding burst of light that engulfed the ship. When the light faded, the creatures were gone. The sea was calm once more, and the siren's shadow drifted silently under the pale light of the moon. The crew stumbled onto the deck, their faces pale and dazed. The map lay at Elias's feet, its symbols faded and lifeless. Whatever power it had once held was gone, leaving behind only a scrap of parchment. "Is it over?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling. "Are we safe?" Elias didn't answer. He stared down at the map, his heart heavy with the realization that the cost of their survival had been far greater than any of them had anticipated. The truth they had sought, a glimpse into the nature of existence, had shattered their perception of reality. And though they had escaped the abyss, its influence lingered within them, buried deep in the recesses of their minds. As the days passed, the crew began to notice subtle changes, not just in themselves, but in the world around them. The stars seemed slightly off, their constellations unfamiliar. The currents shifted unpredictably, pulling them toward uncharted waters. And beneath the surface, the whispers continued, faint but insistent, urging them to return. One night, as Elias stood alone on the quarterdeck, he heard Annalise's voice behind him. "They'll call us back eventually," she said softly. "The abyss isn't done with us." Elias turned to face her, his expression grim. "And when that happens?" Annalise smiled, a cold, hollow smile that sent shivers down his spine. "We'll have no choice but to answer." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Elias watched her go, his chest tight with dread. Somewhere deep within, he knew she was right. The abyss had claimed a piece of each of them, and sooner or later, it would demand the rest. Years later, tales of the Siren Shadow became legend among sailors. Some claimed the ship had been swallowed by the sea. Others swore they had seen it drifting aimlessly, its crew reduced to hollow-eyed wraiths. But no one dared to follow in its wake, for the whispers warned them away. And somewhere in the darkest depths of the ocean, the abyss waited patiently, its hunger insatiable. For those who dared to seek forbidden knowledge, it offered only one reward: eternal torment. You're still here, or has fear already taken you away? If you haven't yet, leave a like and subscribe. Your support breathes life into the darkest stories. I hope we'll meet again soon. Next time, even darker and more terrifying secrets await you. Come back soon while I prepare new nightmares that will haunt your sleep.